It's Wednesday, it's 11:15 and we're live in Westminster.
The ayes to the right, 103. The noes to the left, 363.
Labour suspends 7 Rebel MPs over two-child benefit cap.
If the Labour Party is to have a moral mission, surely it should be to eradicate child poverty.
Universities face a funding crisis, but there's tough talk from the new Education Secretary.
Universities are autonomous and there are expectations around how they manage their budgets, and I would expect them to do that without seeking any calls on the taxpayer.
The new Labour government pushes ahead with plans to ramp up infrastructure to reach net zero targets. We'll ask this Conservative MP why she objects to a new solar farm in her area.
In relation to the particular point, the Prime Minister, the Leader of the Opposition, old habits die hard.
Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak are back at the dispatch box for Prime Minister's questions. Their roles reversed. We'll bring you that live at noon. Joining us today, the Labour MP Emily Thornberry, Shadow Foreign Minister Alicia Cairns, Ava Santina Evans from Politics Jo, and the founder of Conservative Home, Tim Montgomery. This is Politics Live. Let's start with this headline from BBC News. Labour suspends 7 Rebel MPs over two-child benefit cap. Yes, Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, faced the first rebellion of his premiership last night when a group of Labour MPs on the left of the party voted against the government and for an SNP amendment to the King's speech on abolishing the two-child benefit limit. It was a limit that came into force in April 2017, restricts parents and carers from claiming universal credit or child tax credit for a third child. It only applies to children born after this date. What does it say about Keir Starmer's leadership, just pretty well a week in since Parliament's returned, about suspending these 7 MPs?
Look, let me just start by saying nobody in the Labour Party likes the two-child benefit cap. I mean, we really don't. I was one of 3 children, and we were brought up on benefits. My parents had their children before before my father left, so my mother had no idea she was going to have a third child in poverty. I don't want there to be a two-child cap. I absolutely don't. I'm Labour. It comes from my heart. I don't want this. But we have just had a general election where we have been completely clear that there is a really we have the highest taxation levels that we've ever had. We have a huge debt burden. Okay. And any spending that we're going to that, but we have to show where the money comes from. We were absolutely clear during a general election that we had this specific debate. I remember in the clause 5.
So those 7 MPs shouldn't have rebelled.
So we've just had a general election. There was a clear platform, and then, like, within 2 weeks, is it 2 weeks we've been in government? They're voting against the King's speech, the first speech where Labour is setting out its platform, and they decide that although they've just been elected on that platform, they're going to rebel. So we've got lots and lots of new MPs. It has to be clear what the rules are, and I think the whips are putting down a marker.
Right. Well, let's have a look. Here are the 7 Rebel MPs. Emily's absolutely right. They voted for an opposing party's amendment within weeks of Labour winning the election. Was Keir Starmer right to suspend them?
Well, I don't know if it was. I think it was probably a whip's decision.
Whatever.
But I think that, as I say, I think that our marker has to be put down.
Yes. So, yes.
The thing to do is to engage with what it is that we're doing, which is that we've set up a ministerial group, and we're going to be working on what we can do to address the issue of child poverty.
It was quite a sort of breathtaking step for Keir Starmer. You're right. Also, extremely breathtaking, perhaps, for the 7 MPs to do what they did.
Well, I was going to say that,
right?
Because, like, when did that last happen? That you got a new government elected, and within 2 weeks, when the government sets out a program, which is not a surprise. I mean, it is the manner. Well, there you go. So there's a manifesto, and then you translate it to the King's speech. There's nothing different. Everyone was saying, "Ooh, it's so boring. It's what was in the manifesto."
So, what does it say about Keir Starmer's leadership?
Well, it shows that he wants to get on with things and that he's clear about what he wants to do. And I mean, that's what's happening.
Does it mean he's ruthless and isn't going to listen to alternative voices? Because there's one thing to control candidates as ruthless as he did during the campaign. I understand that. But to govern, you need to listen to a variety of voices. And is he going to be a listening Prime Minister? That has to be a concern.
No. So first of all, I would say, A manifesto is a promise to the country. It's not just like a bit of paper. You put down what it is that you're going to do, and you're clear about it. And that's what we've been trying to do when delivering in the King's Speech. We're saying this is our plan for action. This is what we're going to do. You have to start with that. Keir has also said, and we know, I mean, if people were listening to what he was saying, what Bridget Phillipson was saying, we were saying that we do need to address child poverty. We do need to work on it. We are setting up a group.
Right.
We are engaging with people. We are asking people. We are asking people, to come forward with ideas to work with. There are lots of things that you can do in relation to child poverty. Housing being one of them.
No, you've made it clear.
Breakfast clubs. There's lots of other things.
They were wrong to do what they did.
When there is money available, I would certainly be arguing that we should be getting rid of the two-child policy. But at the moment, there isn't any money. And it was quite clear during the general election that we were being honest about that.
Alicia, what does it say about Keir Starmer's leadership?
Well,
is it ruthless in the way that Tim has said?
Well, it's actually a really odd one. So he's proudly announced that he's suspended 7 MPs. And if it's not Keir Starmer that's doing it, I think that's quite concerning because it's the Prime Minister who has the ability to take the whip away.
It's a whip's decision.
No,
Yeah, but all right, look, we can argue about the semantics, but broadly speaking, it is Keir Starmer and the Labour Party.
In addition to the 7 MPs who voted against their own government for a different party's amendment, 42 didn't vote. So my question is, David Lammy, John Healey, fine, they're off on official foreign business. But those other 40, why didn't they vote and why have there not been questions about that? And you do not vote for other amendments to your own King's Speech. That is very clear. And what's bizarre about this is, if I had voted for an amendment against my own King's Speech, which you never did, I would have expected to lose the whip, full stop.
Or maybe they wanted to lose the whip.
Well, this is a point. A, it's obviously they're all from the socialist group that have lost the whip. But B, it's very odd because they've said they've been suspended for a period of time.
6 months.
So it's not even a full whip removal like we would have had, where you would have to fight to get your right back to have the whip.
Right.
So it's not quite as strong as he wants to
Well, but
present.
they are also being asked to vote with Labour during that period. They're like on notice, Ava, in terms of whether they get the whip restored. What does it say, though, about Keir Starmer's leadership and also about the strength of the rebellion? As Alicia quite rightly said, there were about 40 abstentions on the Labour side.
It's very convenient for Keir Starmer because, as we said, they are from the Socialist Campaign Group and they are not welcome, really on those benches. I don't really think Keir Starmer cares if they're there or not. I think Zara Sultana made a very good point this morning, which was she was talking about how lifting this cap would immediately lift 10,000 children in her constituency out of poverty. That's who she voted for yesterday. And, yesterday I was at a multi-bank, which is essentially a food bank, but it also supplies beds and bedding and all sorts of things like that, with Gordon Brown and Sadiq Khan. And I was thinking to myself, I'm standing in the middle of this food bank that is now being provided by private enterprises because children are so hungry in this country. And we're having a debate about whether to lift the two-child benefit cap. It's so nonsensical to me. Obviously, that cap should be lifted.
Is it the right ambition? 60% of voters broadly support the cap, the limit.
Well, look, there's a problem in this country. We don't produce enough children, frankly. It's why we have to turn to so much immigration. But there will be families watching this programme today, Jo, who may earn a reasonable amount of money but have decided not to have, for example, a third child because they think that they can't afford to bring that child up in the way that they would want to. Families all over the country are making incredibly difficult decisions about the size of their families. And then for them to have an extra tax burden to pay for children in other families on welfare is a difficult dilemma. So, yes, of course you want to help children in poverty. There are too many families struggling in the way that Ava has just described. But it's not an easy, simplistic world that we live in. And when there are earning middle-class families struggling as well, to impose extra costs on them seems to me unreasonable. So, although I have lots of reservations about the policy, I understand why it was put in place.
I have to say, I really don't agree with you, Tim. I think it's... if you're a child, you're a child. You can't be blamed for whatever.
After it was announced. It wasn't backdated. And the idea that if you are on the benefits, you should be able to have as many children as you want.
But quite frankly, you could end up... what's a safety net for? You could be perfectly... as I say, I do take it personally because actually it affected my family personally, where my parents were perfectly fine, then they split up, then my mother went on benefits. She didn't know that she was going to end up getting chucked out of our house and end up with no money.
What's the number
so
then,
why
Emily?
should the
How many children does it become? Is it 4 children, 5 children, 6? When do you actually say there's a limit?
In my view, a child is a child.
So,
and a child should not...
If a family has 7 children, if a family has 7 children, we still pay.
Punished for, some kind of perceived wrong behaviour of the parents. A child is a child.
Is it about wrong behaviour? Is it about about wrong behaviour or thinking ahead of time, which is what the reason was behind it, as the Conservatives said in 2017, rightly or wrongly? Because they were given time. It was announced before.
Yeah, well...
We said going
so
forward...
What? I mean, seriously.
My
so
mother
what?
did not have me until she was 38 and then my brother when she was 40 because they couldn't afford it. That is why they had children, which back then, 38 was incredibly late to have your first child because they couldn't afford me. And my parents were incredibly left-wing and they thought it was absolutely wrong to rely on the state for them to be able to have the family they wanted. They waited until they could fund it. And there are people who fall into emergency support. That is why we have focused on getting people into work, because workless households is where we see the greatest amount of child poverty.
And that's why when looking at how we're going to address the issue of child poverty, we look at many different things, which will include new rules to allow people to not any longer be on 0 hours contracts, to be able to give them rights of work that will help them.
Can I just put something that Ava said earlier on in the discussion? Are those 7 MPs unwelcome in the Labour Party because of their stance and because of the behaviour that you have criticised?
I don't think they're unwelcung.
No,
I think
you would be happy to have them all back?
No, I think that it's right to suspend them. I think that it's clear, what it is that's expected. If you're a Labour MP, you're a Labour MP. You're not an MP for a different party. And so you really should. It should mean something, the whip. And so I think that it's important to be clear and to be disciplined about this. To say that people are not
just
welcome
one other
is
thing,
not
actually.
right.
There was one thing. There was one
and
thing that Zara Sultana, you mentioned, one of the 7, called the decision to suspend them a macho virility test. What did you make of that?
Well, yeah, I think that lends itself to the point I was making earlier. But look, Zara Sultana and Afsana Begum, 2 of those MPs that were suspended, there were attempts to deselect them even before the election. So, they are not welcome in the party.
And I think it's very interesting that Labour refused to put anyone up this morning or last night to defend their decision. In fact, I think Sky called it running for the hills. If you are going to make this decision, you're claiming it's because you're tough on having discipline, then you need to damn well put people up to defend the decision.
Well, let's get some discussion around your position on solar farms, Alicia. BBC News, government approves solar farm despite opposition. One of Ed Miliband's first actions in power as Secretary of State for Energy Security and Net Zero is to give the green light for the construction of 3 major solar farms in England, all part of decarbonising the UK. You're a big part of the opposition to the solar farm, one of them in your area, in your constituency. Why?
Because for the last 15 years, I have talked about what is taking place in Xinjiang as a genocide. In fact, David Lammy said that if he came to power, he would not only label it genocide as a government, but he'd take the Chinese government to court. And yet the company who are behind this have been named by the Foreign Office as the most complicit, the highest exposure to slave labour of any company in the world. The US government has sanctioned them and said they should not be allowed to operate in their country. And they rang my office and said to my member of staff, what does Alicia want to drop her opposition? And they listed a number of things I would be given if I was willing to drop my opposition. So if you think that this is the kind of company that we should have on our soil...
The company isn't here, but your broad point is that solar panels, or at least a lot of the constituent parts, come from Xinjiang. And the exploitation, it looks of Uyghur people there. If those solar panels were manufactured elsewhere, would you drop your opposition?
So what I would drop my opposition if we had a different form of solar plant within the constituency. There are wider problems with this one.
Right.
My biggest is the company, which I've been very clear on. My communities have said we will have a solar plant at this substation because it's underused and we want to go green, and where it's very, very strong the push within my community to do that. However, there are wider issues with this company, the size of it as well, 2,100 acres. Right. And most importantly, there are 11 solar plants currently planned for Lincolnshire and 3 for Rutland, despite the fact that we produce well over a quarter of this country's food.
We'll come back to the issues about the solar farm or the solar plant itself. But Emily, on the point of companies, these solar panels being made by companies claimed to have a very high exposure to forced labour in China, what's your response? Should you be doing it?
Well, I think we certainly should look at that. But I think that we shouldn't be distracted from the main point, which is that it is really important that we get more independence when it comes to producing our energy. And we must provide that energy through offshore wind, through onshore wind, and through solar plants. And actually, when you talk to the National Farmers Union, farmers want to have different sources of income in order to, so it's not really a question of undermining sort of a critical access to producing food in the country, because actually it tends not to be prime farmland, and the farmers seem to be happy about that.
So just to clarify on this one, 50% of it is the highest quality of agricultural land, and you do not have energy independence if you are reliant on Chinese state-backed companies. That is not independence.
Well, but hang on, the Trade Association Solar Energy UK estimates that solar farms occupy less than 0.1% of the UK's land. It's not, well, but it's not a huge amount. Even with these plans, Alicia, it goes up to 0.5% of the land.
But that is not all where we produce our best.
And it's not in my backyard.
No, it's not. I've said we will have one. We have said we want to have one.
Yeah.
But we've said not this. But also, let's be clear about this. We have decarbonised faster than any other major economy over the last 14 years as the Conservatives. How? Through wind. Ask anyone, if you did any vox pop on the street and said to people, what is the primary source of energy for this country, they would say, wind.
Let me show you.
Yeah, but if we're going to decarbonise, we have to be serious about it. And we have a mandate from the general election. We made it perfectly clear that we were going to build,
because you're 28 billion that was,
and we're going to
wasn't.
build homes, and we're going to build infrastructure, and we're going to decarbonise, which means that there are. And of course, what we need to do is listen to particular local problems and ensure that we have a proper process for it. But we must not be knocked off course.
But Ed Miliband wasn't listening when he signed off 3 major plants and boasted of doing it in 3 days. How did he read the 3,000 plus
that's a process question. Let me just show you this Guardian headline. Labour told it will need to defeat net zero NIMBYs. They might think of you as one of those to decarbonise Britain. Opposition in wealthier areas is likely, and overcoming it is essential, says the Resolution Foundation. And it is essential.
Well, I think you were wrong, Jo, to just say it's a process question of the kind that Alicia just mentioned.
What, in terms of the 3 days and Ed Miliband doing it quickly?
I think what it showed about Ed Miliband is that for him, net zero is almost a religious commitment. He won't go through the normal processes that you would expect government to go through. And my problem with this is, of course, we need to go greener. You know, the carbon impact of the decisions that we've taken as a Western world largely have had a huge implications. But are we, in the pursuit of net zero, going to say that Alicia's concerns, for example, about slave labour being behind this company don't matter?
Oh, no.
Are we going to say that the food...
I don't think anyone said that.
Well, we effectively are, I think, because the food production in Lincolnshire, which is incredibly important for our agriculture, you add up all of these things, and sometimes people are so committed to net zero, they won't listen to anything else at all, even though those pragmatic concerns should matter. And a good government will be balanced and pragmatic. My worry about Ed Miliband is, as I've said, he doesn't think really about anything else other than hitting that net zero target.
I'd say on the flip side of that, actually, you've got a lot of homeowners who see that the price of their houses, that's what they see as their sort of religion, I guess. This is all about people's selfishness. I'm sorry, but you don't want to have this in your area because you know that it could potentially diminish your house price. And I'm sorry, tough. It's got to go somewhere.
Well, Alicia,
in a local area, people's energy prices will go down because part of the deal is that if you agree to an energy production facility in your area, then that will have an impact on the local
policy on that. It is down to individual companies. No, it's not. Emily, I'm sorry, you haven't looked into the policy. There is no national policy on what the compensation is. You can laugh, but there just isn't. You are incorrect on that.
No.
The reality on this is I pushed for wind to be moved back on shore. I was one of the Conservative MPs that got that policy change.
Some of your colleagues didn't agree with you.
They didn't agree with me.
Tim, you raise legitimate concerns in terms of, is net zero a religion for Ed Miliband? But does that mean that green lighting these solar farms, some of which will take over land occupied at the moment by golf courses, for example, is that a mistake?
Not necessarily, but judge every case on its merits. And look, even if we did everything that Britain possibly could do to tackle climate change, if China and India carry on polluting, it doesn't make any difference at all. So let's not saddle British pensioners with huge energy bills, destroy British agriculture, destroy the homes values of people that you think are just being selfish.
Nothing is being destroyed.
Everything has to be balanced with how things are moving across the world, and not us just sort of be willing to take a huge sacrifice for ourselves and actually not stop.
And the planning inspectorate told Ed
is
Miliband to decline one of them, and yet he still did it. And do you know why he did it? Because Labour wanted to be able to announce at the end of 1 week in power, these were things that they had secured.
Well,
and on the flip
wrong.
side, it's taken 20 years for some of these infrastructure to be able to get through
planning. None of those
planning.
3 solar plants have been there for 20 years. That's a complete nonsense.
But there has just been a stasis during 14 years of
a lot of
Conservative.
They've been with
We were
government
not
for 6
seeing
months.
the infrastructure being built on land. We were not.
Yes.
And we have to. We have to build homes, and we have to build infrastructure, and we have to
2.5
build.
million homes.
We have to build solar
But
plants.
Emily, isn't this an early example of the sorts of opposition you are going to face, Labour is going to face, in order to meet net zero targets, in order to meet its target of 1.5 million homes? Are you going to be able to push through the kind of opposition legitimately held in order to achieve
as
it?
I said at the outset, of course each project needs to be looked at, individually. You have to listen to local concerns and you have to do your best to address them. But you also have to keep at the forefront of your mind what the national interest is. And it is in the national interest for us to be building more homes and making sure that a younger generation has somewhere to live.
Perhaps it comes to your backyard.
And it's also,
no, I don't
it
mind
is not in the
people
national
building homes
interest
in
to
my
go
area
green
at all. I've
on
never
blood
been
Labour.
against any.
I'm
So would
I'm
you
just
go
saying in
green on
general.
blood Labour? Because
And
that is what Labour is
unfortunately,
saying.
there's no space for any solar farms.
Would you go green on blood Labour? Because that is what Labour has signed off this week. And they didn't consider
Well,
the
I've answered that
application of
again. I mean, I've answered that again. I think that if we are importing things that have been built in areas where the weakers are, then I do think we need to look at that again. But that doesn't change the principle, which is that we need solar farms, and farmers are in favour of it. And frankly, we should all be in favour of it, because it will, in the end, it's also going to drive down our bills.
Not all farmers. Well, we don't know, do
Well,
we?
we do. We know
in
that
terms
we
of
don't
whether
want to be
bills will go
dependent on
down.
Putin for our energy in future.
We've
But let's be
asked
dependent on
about-
China.
Grow it ourselves.
Let's have a look at this headline in The Guardian. English universities should not expect government bailout, Phillipson says. That's Bridget Phillipson, the Education Secretary. You heard her in the headlines. Acknowledges crisis in the sector, with many institutions facing severe financial difficulties. Let's speak to Vivienne Stern, the Chief Executive of Universities UK, which represents 142 universities. She joins us from Sheffield. Hello to you, Vivienne. What are the financial problems and how significant are they facing universities?
Well, it's a bit like we've been boiling a frog very slowly and all of a sudden the heat was whacked up. So the domestic fee for English undergraduates has been frozen for about a decade, and inflation has sort of nibbled away at that. And then a period of very high inflation means that the value of that in real terms dropped quite fast. And that has been combined with quite a sharp down in international students. And international students, who are very important to the UK sector, have become increasingly a source of kind of essential cross-subsidy rather than just a kind of nice to have. And that's what sort of led to a pretty serious structural issue right across the sector. And I don't want to catastrophize about it, because frankly, what all universities are doing, including here in Sheffield Hallam, where I am today, is, making the kind of hard decisions they have to make to balance the books. But the bottom line is it can't go on like this.
What are those hard decisions that you're making, or universities are
making?
making?
Well, I mean, there are lots of jobs being lost across the sector. I talk to vice chancellors every single day, one way or another, and quite often you'll hear them making quite significant job losses in the kind of small, the low hundreds. They're doing things like, closing courses that aren't very popular. They are reducing the number of module options that are available to students. So if you do a degree, quite often you get to choose some elements.
Is that not a good thing if you're closing courses that aren't popular and they're not sustainable?
Well, it depends what you're talking about. So, I mean, modern foreign languages is a good example. My personal view is that in this sort of age in which it's extremely likely that we face, pretty significant challenges from parts of the world where the UK doesn't have great language competence, it would be a good idea if a greater proportion of our population spoke, for example, Mandarin Chinese, or, had a better grasp of Arabic, or, was able to really understand not only when people are speaking very politely to you in English, but also what they're saying when you can't understand them.
All right.
In Russian. I think we should be investing in that stuff. But
you've mentioned investing. What do you want the government to do?
Well, look, the first thing is they've got to, I believe, they've got to restore the link between inflation and the tuition fee. I don't think it's hard for most people to kind of understand that, you know, as inflation erodes the real value of something, if it doesn't, if it doesn't move in line with inflation, then, you know, effectively you're getting poorer. And that would be true of all of us. I mean,
so you'd like
it's true of us when we...
All right, well, you'd like to see fees go up. I mean, you've heard the Education Secretary ruling out any central government financial support for now. What was your reaction to that?
Well, look, I think, first of all, we're not asking for a kind of bailout for unsustainable institutions. My argument would be there are universities which were sustainable yesterday and can be sustainable tomorrow, but it might take them a bit of time to get from A to B, because if you implement a big cost-saving exercise and you're cutting, you know, 10% of your costs, which is not uncommon, it takes you a while to do that. You've got to go through a process. And there's also upfront costs that's associated with, for example, losing jobs and reshaping things. So
Vivian, stay with us. Stay with us while we get the rest of the panel in. I mean, listening to that was a huge sigh from you halfway through the interview with Vivian. She says your party has partly created the problem in terms of restrictions on international foreign students who pay higher fees, have been obviously sustaining universities. What's your response to that?
Well, what we don't want to happen is for students to be left mid-course without, you know, a university to be able to go to. But I think £9,250 is what the average UK student pays. And then on top of that, you have international students paying £30,000. That is not a small amount. I think it's really important for universities to justify where those costs are going. And in terms of the point of languages, I'm a big linguist, I'm a big believer in languages, but actually not every university needs to offer Mandarin, not every university needs to offer Russian. It needs to be the best suited universities that are offering it. And I think Labour are saying what we said, which is essentially universities need to be able to stand on their own 2 feet. They also have many ways of getting additional funds, whether it be research or partnerships. Again, Vivian and I will remember when she came before my committee, that is not about getting in bed with the Chinese military, which is happening far too often. But yes, we want people properly provided for, and that's why we created the Office for Students.
Right, well, Vivian, you need to stand on... Universities need to stand on their own 2 feet, is what Labour's saying too.
Look, I to some extent, universities are autonomous and they've got to take responsibility for their own finances, and that's what's happening. When you look at the cuts, that is that in action. But the point is, we're not in a world in which we can control our prices. You know, fees are set by government, and so is the immigration regime. So frankly, it's all very well saying we're autonomous, but we are not really free to create our own weather.
Well, Emily,
so
should the government's not going to help them out, not going to bail them out, and Vivian's not asking for a bailout as such, should they be allowed to raise tuition fees in England?
We've got no plans to raise tuition fees.
So you'll see universities close?
No, I think that it's government's job to make sure that the universities are properly regulated, so that they look after their budgets properly. They don't put themselves into a position whereby their very futures are at risk. There's no, as I understand it, any suggestions of universities going bankrupt at the moment are just hypothetical. But obviously it's government's job to make sure that that remains hypothetical. But I think it's also important to be clear that if universities are hitting have been hitting choppy weather. It's been coming for a while. Obviously, coming out of COVID, the amount of inflation as a result of that, the amount of inflation as a result of September 22. We all know that crisis, and various other inflationary pressures. I appreciate this has been building up for some time, but I think that it's also been incumbent on previous government to ensure that there was a regulation, that there was a close watch on universities, so they didn't get into sort of trouble, and they didn't spend all their time just kicking universities and playing political games with them, but instead to be actually, praising them and for making it clear that they are the jewels in the crown. To make it clear, I mean, seriously, they are.
Right.
They're jewels in the crown in our country, and we should talk up the achievements of young people and not spend our time on these sort of silly culture wars that the previous government seemed to look at universities and just think of that.
Freedom of speech in university is not a culture war issue. There are Hong Kongers who felt that they were under threat in the classroom.
It's probably the Mickey Mouse degree discourse.
I want to get rid of the Mickey Mouse degrees. When I went to university...
Right. Oh, OK. Well, so that would be the problem.
People offered David Beckham studies. When I went to university, There were people being offered David Beckham studies as a course.
But we used to have...
Well, at least you were able to pick a Mickey Mouse. When I asked others, actually, during the campaign, no one could name a so-called Mickey Mouse course. Tim, you were saying not all university or higher education institutions are jewels in the crown. What do you mean when you think about it being one of the greatest exports, British exports, and we have certainly had one of the highest numbers of international students after the US? Are they not value for money?
Well, look, like all industries, like all institutions, some are good, some not so good. And I think there are lots of ways of measuring the impact of our universities' education. You know, the earning power of students after study is one potential measure. And some universities, absolutely, they put rockets underneath a person's life. Others just saddle them with debt. And I think we need to make a distinction between those universities which are really adding value to our economic and cultural life and those that, frankly, have expanded too much. I went back to my old university in Exeter a few years ago. It dominates the city now. You know, it's 5-6 times as large as it was when I went there. And some universities have just expanded too fast. They've taken on too many people. They haven't thought through some of their decisions. And the idea that the taxpayer should subsidise these institutions, which just haven't been well managed, is wrong. We just need to take an institution by institution guide and look at some of them surviving, some of them growing even further because they really are that good. They are the jewels in the crown that Emily describes. But some just aren't. Some are just offering a very bog standard education at a very inflated price.
Vivian, what do you say in response to Tim? And then I'll come to you, Ava.
Well, it's hard. You know, I spend every single week I go to a university. I was in one yesterday, which probably falls into the category that a lot of people would say was a kind of not a world-leading institution. People tend to imagine that it's only the kind of great research-intensive household name institutions that this country needs. But, you know, that's an institution which is really well designed to serve a particular student population. And they tend to be students who come in with lower entry grades, who want a kind of small community feel, that want very kind of, you know, intense support, personalised support. And frankly, that university is the right thing for a particular group of students. And so I'd argue people are determined to turn the university system into kind of a hierarchy where there are good universities and bad universities. We need diversity. We actually do. And I know that people are probably small when I say diversity, but I mean different universities for different things.
All right, well, let me hang on, let Tim ask a question.
Can I just ask about that diversity point, though? Because since tuition fees were introduced, we haven't got the kind of diversity of supply you'd have expected in a normal sort of market system. You know, where are the 2-year degree courses? Where are the sort of real diversity so that students who want to do something shorter, more intensive, can do it, and then you go for the sort of more traditional degree? The university sector really is actually very sort of stale in the sort of offering that it's produced.
Look, the consequence of creating a market system in the higher education sector is that every university chases student demand. And, you know, that was in fact what was intended when the regime was created. So the reason why lots of universities offer, you know, lots of courses in business and administration is because what students want to study. Now, if you want to change that, if you want to give universities reasons to sort of provide different things, you've got to change the incentive structure. Because right now the incentive structure is meet student demand, and that it was designed to do that.
But is that meeting a student demand, Ava, because students are being charged fees? So they're thinking more about life after university, the jobs they may have. Is it still the ambition that Tony Blair first talked about sending certainly 50% of our young people to university, or do we need to look again at what happens after school?
Well, there were different outcomes during the Tony Blair era. You know, if you graduated from university, you probably wouldn't walk into a £20,000 salary. And, you know, salaries have continued to decline over the last 14 years or so. The idea that you would then put up fees in the face of declining salaries, I think, is absolutely ludicrous. But, you know, to your point about the taxpayer not bailing out universities, it is going to happen because one of these institutions will go bust. The taxpayer will have to foot the bill because no government can possibly fall in line with sort of IEA policy and let one collapse. They simply can't.
Well, do you think the government will? You think they should just let them collapse?
The university's ever expanded, of course it should.
Will and should Labour step in if an institution like one of the universities is collapsing and about to go bust?
As I say, I think that's just a hypothetical.
How hypothetical is it, Vivian?
It is hypothetical. Now, you have to it's a hypothetical, and you know, as I said earlier, it's obviously government's job to ensure that remains a hypothetical. But at the moment, it's a hypothetical.
Well, it's OK. Is it a hypothetical or is it not, Vivian?
Look, I sort of every day reach out and just check how a small number of institutions are doing, because look, you can see that universities are cutting fast, they're cutting hard. And for most of them, they'll be able to get from where they are now with a cost base they can't sustain with their income to a place where they can, right? If that income keeps going down, the problem will just re-emerge next year. For some institutions, the question is, do you have strong enough cash balances to buy you the time to make the cuts? And if you don't, that's when you're going to get into trouble.
Right. So are there institutions on the verge of collapse, in your mind?
Look, put it this way. I think that most universities will manage to do what they need to do, at least in the short term. But I cannot say with any confidence, and as I say, I check this every single day, that it is not possible. And that's why we're all taking it so seriously, and we're thinking through, okay, what would happen in the scenario that an institution really was, its auditors could not sign it off as a going concern. That's really how it would happen. But the point is, look, for those people who say you shouldn't put fees up, my kind of question is, what do you mean by that? Do you mean never? Do you mean not till 2030? Do you mean not till 2040? Is it going to be 9,250 in 2050? No, it's not.
Do you think it's fair that on the students?
Yeah, go on.
I actually think that post the 2008 financial crisis, one of the ways that the last Conservative, it was the coalition government, sustained universities was putting more of the weight of paying for higher education on the student. I'd like to see that balance restored, so there's more upfront public investment in teaching, so that the whole cost is not loaded on the student. But right now,
you've got two issues there. You've got two issues. The first one is that a student should not be asked to pay more than £9,250. Do you know that I look at my student loan and it's now it's actually exponentially more than it was when I actually graduated, and I've been paying it off every single month because of the interest that it's accrued. The other problem that you've got with universities is outsourcing and privatisation. Why have you allowed universities to outsource a lot of their accommodation, a lot of their cleaning services, a lot of their catering services to private companies that feed off of their funding and drain their funds? I think that's something you need to resolve before you ever go back to the public taxpayer, and ask them to foot the bill.
I mean, the short answer to that question is efficiency. Everybody's asking universities to be more efficient. They all outsource things like catering services because it's more efficient way of delivering it. And, you know, you cannot have it both ways. You can't have... And actually, universities are not... They're not hoteliers. They're not... you know, there are better ways of making sure that the university sort of management time is spent on teaching.
I mean, it's yet another example after 14 years of yet another bit of the public sector that is on its knees.
What,
and
so
yet another bit.
These are businesses that
Labour is expected
people
to
who do apprenticeship should not have to pay for other people to go to university.
It's one thing after another after another. The to-do list is huge.
Right. Oh, well, we're going to come after PMQs to the to-do list. Vivienne Stern, thank you very much for joining us today for that discussion. Let's go and have a little look inside the House of Commons, because it's filling up, and of course it's the first Prime Minister's questions for Keir Starmer. It's also the last before the summer recess. It's also the first for Rishi Sunak as leader of the opposition. Let's talk to the BBC's chief political correspondent, Henry Zeffman. He's in Central Lobby, just a few yards away from the House of Commons and the green benches. So, Henry, just tell us about the change of the look and the feel, because it is going to feel very different.
I think it's going to feel really surreal, certainly for everyone in there, but also for those of us who spend our time watching Prime Minister's questions. You know, I've watched Keir Starmer ask the questions 130 times. That's how many times he did it as leader of the opposition. But I've never seen him answer them. It's the first Conservative, Rishi Sunak, who will be asking the main set of 6 questions for 14 years. I think we'll also see, I mean, in fact, 10 minutes ago, so with 20-odd minutes to go before PMQs, it was already standing room only on the Labour benches, on the government benches. There's simply not room on the government side of the House of Commons for all the Labour MPs who got elected 3 weeks ago, whereas I wouldn't be totally shocked if we saw little spaces of green leather on the opposition benches, because there aren't that many Conservatives, and those that remain are not wildly enthusiastic about watching the man who beat them take PMQs.
We've also had the first candidate to formally declare in the Conservative leadership contest, the Shadow Home Secretary, also former Foreign Secretary, James Cleverly. Is he going to be the first of many throwing the hat into the ring?
Certainly, but I don't know how many are going to start doing it publicly. I mean, in practice, there are about 8 Conservative leadership candidates already trying to win the support of their colleagues. Between now and Monday, they need the signature of 10 Conservative MPs. That might not sound like a lot, but overall there's only about 120 Conservative MPs, so actually it's a relatively high proportion of the Conservative Parliamentary Party. I think some of those who are more confident about making it past that stage might just ease off a little while before publicly declaring, because they're confident they've got that bit locked down, and they start to think about how they might begin to sell themselves to the Conservative membership. But even that stage isn't going to arise until late September, early October. So this is a really long process, and I think there's plenty of twists and turns still to come.
Yes, all the way through to November the 2nd. Henry Zeffman, thank you very much. We'll let you take your place in the gallery to watch Prime Minister's questions. Tim, what do you want to see from the next leader of the Conservative Party? Anyone you like the look of?
How long have we got, Jo?
You've got about 2 minutes, but go for it.
Well, look, I heard, for example, James Cleverly's watched his video today, and he's an accomplished, nice guy, but he was sort of talking about his strengths and his qualities, but no sort of real sense of why the Conservative Party, my party, suffered the most calamitous defeat of modern times. And I think what we first need as a Conservative Party is to really come to terms with the scale of what we just suffered. We didn't do what we said we would do. We were behaved badly. We weren't able to hold any line consistently. The failure was enormous, comprehensive. And I think we have to answer the question, first of all, why? Why did we fail so badly, institutionally, personnel-wise? And because I don't really still understand the gap between what we promised to do and what we did deliver. I'm fundamentally a Conservative. I believe in Conservative values. I believe the facts of life are Conservative. But the institution, which supposedly represents Conservatism, governed really, really badly. And I want I want a post-mortem before we sort of move on, really. And I haven't heard that really yet from James Cleverly or any of the other candidates.
Do you want that post-mortem? Do you want it to go on until November the 2nd?
I'm very happy with the timeline that we've agreed. I think it's the right one that allows us to have that conversation. Ultimately, we need to win back the trust of the British people, and that means recognising that, yes, we did a lot of good, yes, we faced the greatest challenges of any parliament since World War II, but also we didn't get things right, so we need to focus on that. So because I'm on the 1922 and I'm on the party board, so that's the organisation that set the rules and now has to oversee the leadership, I won't be nominating anyone because I need to keep that process credible.
Who would you like the look of?
So people who can rebuild that trust and show they have a credible platform. Also, I want to see someone who doesn't say we just need to focus on reform. Winning back reform makes us competitive, but we can't win without Lib Dem and Labour votes. So there are a number of candidates who I have a very good relationship with, Priti Patel, Tom Tugendhat, people like that, who I think can be those unifying figures within our party. But I want someone who is honest and credible, and we'll have to see who the final candidates are because we don't know them yet, but by Monday we will.
But, Emily, were you surprised that you are not in the cabinet?
Yeah, I was surprised. I didn't know that was going to happen. Yeah, I'm very sad about it.
Yes.
I would have liked to have been in the cabinet, because I'd been in the shadow cabinet for 8.5 years, continually, and on the front bench for more than 10. So I didn't get offered any government job. So it's sad. Yeah.
Have you had any communications about it?
I'm not going into all of that. I mean,
but have you had any? I mean, have people?
Yeah, obviously people.
Right. Okay.
But I'm not. But I'm going to stand for the chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, which
because you were the chair of the Foreign Affairs,
which would be a great job. I mean, as and I've seen it done very well, and I think that it's a vote of the whole House. You hold the government to account. Our standing in the world is something which is of huge importance to us on every level, and we need to make sure we get it right.
Well, and you were Shadow Foreign Secretary.
And I was Shadow Foreign Secretary for 4 years, and I was Shadow Defence Secretary for 6 months.
Emily, get your support?
Shadow International Trade for a year, and I did Brexit. So I'm just still going through the CV.
Display it here. But would you any tips for Emily?
I think the tip is you have to be willing to be able to focus on national interest. This is the thing about foreign policy. You have to be willing to scrutinise your own party in recognition that country comes first, and there is nothing that matters more than keeping our country safe. And that is why the role is so critical. So I will be looking for somebody who is willing to go toe-to-toe with their own party, but always in a respectful way. Because if we don't, the consequence... I mean, I was the only MP in the world that warned that we were going to see the Gaza crisis of 2023. We should not have been in the place where I was the only one warning that 2020... yes, it was 2023. 24?
Can I say something about Emily? Because with different politics, but one of the reasons I've never sort of wanted to go into politics is because
you're sane.
It's the link between what you put in and what you get back is so capricious. Now, I don't understand why Keir Starmer took the decision he did, but what I saw was an incredibly able, enthusiastic, loyal person for 8.5 years, served their party, and at the moment of becoming elected into power, not to be put onto the front bench. There's very few other careers where that would happen. And I don't know why, I'm not going to fish with Emily, but it's a hard life, politics, and there isn't always a lot of sympathy for politicians, but my heart really did go out for Emily when she experienced that.
But it remains the best job in the world, actually. I wouldn't want to do anything else. I really like being a barrister, but actually I like being a politician more. And it begins with the honour of representing my community on the national stage. And it absolutely is an honour. And I have done things that I would never have had a chance to do, met people I would never have met. And, you know, I'm not dead. You know.
No, you're very much alive, Emily. Yes, but it is a kick in the teeth, as you said, isn't it?
And Meg Healy is another one who I think, again, I was really disappointed to see her overlooked. She has been an exceptional chair of the Public Accounts
Committee. Well, she's standing for chair of the Treasury.
Well, if you get Treasury, but again, we don't know what you're going to get. But I thought it was a real shame. She's exceptional.
I think we may go into the House of Commons in just a moment. But Ava, again, if we can return to the new makeup, all those new MPs in the House of Commons, the Liberal Democrats now, Ed Davey is going to be able to ask questions of Keir Starmer. It was the SNP. Do you think it will make any sort of tangible difference to those watching PMQs?
I think that it'll be disappointing not to have Stephen Flynn every week. He was he was entertaining and he was quite lively. I think he's got a question today though, so we're being eased back in. But with Ed Davey, I mean, 72 MPs he's now representing. It's absolutely extraordinary.
Jumping into some water off a balloon.
Do we know what's happening to Nigel Farage? Is he going to get regular questions? Or
well, he won't get regular questions, but again, there are going to be obviously many more Green MPs and the first Reform MPs.
There is a Reform candidate on the order paper today.
He was very surprised when he did his maiden speech yesterday, I think. I think he was expecting to be controversial and be shouted at, and people just sat silently.
Do you think it will look
he was quite disappointed?
Just PMQs, Prime Minister's questions?
I think Keir Starmer will try and take the heat out of it. I think.
Do you?
I think it's Keir Starmer's style is to be more sort of...
Well, let's take a look and go into the chamber.
And in which case, we're going to start with Callum Miller. Yay! Question 1, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I know the whole House will be shocked by the news that a soldier has been attacked in Kent. Our thoughts are with him, his family and our armed forces who serve to keep us safe. We wish him a swift recovery. Yeah. Mr. Speaker, the whole House will also want to join me in wishing Team GB good luck as they travel to Paris for the Olympic Games. Yeah. And Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others discussing how this government will bring about the change the country has decisively voted for. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings today.
I begin by welcoming the Prime Minister to his first questions as Prime Minister. I also associate myself with his remarks about the soldier in Kent and, of course, my wishes to the British Olympians. At Coombe, in my constituency, Thames Water has pumped sewage into the River Evenlode for over 2,600 hours in the last year. Thames Water was allowed by Ofwat to withdraw £7 billion in dividends, yet now wants to jack up my constituents' bills. I welcome the water bill in the King's speech, but would the Prime Minister agree with my constituents and me that the system is broken? And will he now commit to scrapping Ofwat and replacing it with a tougher regulator that will finally put people and planet ahead of water company profits?
Yeah. Can I welcome the honourable member to his place and thank him for raising this important issue in relation to water. And customers should not pay the price for the mismanagement by water companies, and we've already announced immediate steps to put water companies under tougher regime, and the Minister for Water will meet the bosses of failing companies to hold them to account for their performance. After 14 years of failure with our rivers and beaches, it falls to this government of service to fix the mess of the failure of the last 14 years.
Nadia Whitson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I welcome the Prime Minister to his place. Mr. Speaker, many young trans people and their families are extremely concerned about the restrictions on puberty blockers implemented by the last government. One of my constituents, a parent of a trans child, told me, "I'm so worried about my child. I'm terrified for what this means for them and where Britain is going on these issues." Will the Prime Minister meet with young trans people, their families and organisations supporting them, so that he can hear why they feel so strongly that these restrictions must be reversed?
Can I welcome the honourable friend back to her place? Our guiding principles must be the well-being of children. And this is a serious government, and we will approach that question with care, not inflammatory dividing lines. The CAS review was clear that there's not enough evidence on the long-term impact of puberty blockers to know if they're safe. And the Health Secretary will consult with organisations supporting young people and families, and I will ensure that there is a meeting with her and the relevant minister as soon as that can be arranged.
Now come to the Leader of the Opposition, Rishi Sunak.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I join with the Prime Minister in expressing my shock at the attack on a British soldier? Our thoughts are with him and his family as we wish him a speedy recovery. And I also join with the Prime Minister in his warm words about our Olympic athletes. I've no doubt that after years of training, focus and dedication, they'll bring back many gold medals. Although, to be honest, I'm probably not the first person they want to hear advice from on how to win. But I'm glad in our exchanges. I'm glad, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm glad in our exchanges so far we have maintained a cross-party consensus on important matters of foreign policy. And in that spirit today, I wanted to focus our exchange on Ukraine and national security. The UK has consistently been the first country to provide new capabilities to Ukraine, such as the long-range weapons that have been used so effectively in the Black Sea. Now, those decisions aren't easy, and I was grateful to the Prime Minister for his support as I made those decisions in government. And in opposition, I offer that same support to him. So can I ask that he continues to be responsive to Ukraine's new requests so that they don't just stand still, but can decisively win out against Russian aggression?
Can I thank the Leader of the Opposition for not only raising the question of Ukraine, but doing it in a way which can maintain the unity across this House, which has been so important to the Ukrainian people. And I can assure him that we are, of course, talking to Ukraine about how they deal with the Russian aggression that they are facing, have been facing for many, many months. And I will continue to try to do that in the way that he did, which is to reach out across the House to share such information as we can to maintain the unity that is so important.
I thank him for that response. Now, I also found that one of the UK's key roles as Ukraine's closest ally is to encourage other countries to follow our lead in providing new military capabilities. And in that vein, when he saw Chancellor Scholz recently, I'm sure he thanked him for the considerable air defence that the Germans are providing the Ukrainians. But did he also raise with him the issue of the Germans perhaps providing long-range missiles, just as the UK, America and France have now done?
I had the opportunity in Washington at the NATO Council to talk to our German counterparts. There was a strong theme there on Ukraine, discussed with all of our allies, and part of my message was to urge all of our allies to provide further support where they can to the Ukrainian people, and that was well received, and there was unity coming out of the NATO Council. That's what we must all do.
I'm glad to hear the Prime Minister raise at the NATO summit as well, because I very much welcome the message that came out loud and clear from that summit, and indeed the Prime Minister's words from the dispatch box on Monday about Ukraine's irreversible path to NATO membership. And so does he agree with me that fatuous Russian claims on Ukrainian territory must not act as a block to Ukraine joining the NATO defensive alliance?
I wholeheartedly agree, and it is for NATO allies to decide who is a member of NATO, formed 75 years ago proud and probably the most successful alliance that's ever been formed. And that's why it was really important at the summit that we were able to say there is now this irreversible path to membership. That's a step forward from a year ago, and President Zelensky was very pleased that we've been able to make that successful transition.
The opposition.
Thanks to the complex legal and diplomatic work that the UK has led over the past several months, together with our allies Canada and America, the Prime Minister will, I hope, now find that there is a sound and established legal basis to go further on sanctions and seize Russian assets and use them to fund Ukrainian reconstruction. Now, that work has taken time, but I hope he is able to take a look at it, and can he confirm for the House that this work is something that he will take forward, because if he does, I can assure him that the opposition will support him in doing so.
Again, I'm grateful for this opportunity to say how united we were on the question of sanctions across this House. The use now made of what has been seized and frozen is an important issue on which I think we can move forward. And I know the Chancellor is already beginning to have some discussions about how we can take more effective measures. Again, I will seek to reach out across the House as we do this important work together.
The opposition.
I very much welcome the Prime Minister's response, but I also welcome both his and the Defence Secretary's recent emphasis on the importance of the Tempest fighter jet programme. It's a crucial sovereign capability, as he mentioned, and important for our alliances with Italy and Japan. Furthermore, however, other countries also wish to participate. And in government, we had begun initial productive discussions with our friend and ally Saudi Arabia about their desire to potentially join the programme. So could the Prime Minister confirm that he will continue those initial positive conversations with Saudi Arabia? And again, I can assure him that he will have our support in doing so.
Well, let me make this absolutely clear. This is a really important programme. Significant progress has already been made, and we want to build on that progress. And I've had some initial discussions, not least in Farnborough, where I was just a few days ago.
Leader of the opposition.
Finally, Mr. Speaker, can I just say that in the dangerous and uncertain world that we now sadly live in, I know firsthand how important it is that our Prime Minister can use his prerogative power to quickly respond militarily to protect British national security, sometimes without giving this House prior notice. Now, these are perhaps the most difficult decisions that a Prime Minister can take, and I welcomed his support when I made them. And I want to take this opportunity to assure him of the opposition's support if he deems it necessary to take similar action in the future. So does he agree with me that whilst the use of the prerogative power is sometimes politically controversial, it is essential to ensure the safety and security of the British people?
I agree it's essential, and our security is the first duty of government. I was grateful to the Leader of the Opposition for reaching out when action had to be taken to me personally to ensure that I was briefed on the sensitive issues that lay behind the decisions that he had to take. And as I mentioned to him last week, I will endeavour to ensure that we proceed in the same way so that he has access to all the information that he needs to come to a determination, which I hope will be, to be able to support the position that this government takes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and welcome back. Can I congratulate the Prime Minister on such a positive start to his premiership and on resetting the dial on politics as public service, as a force for good. Of our different views and opinions in this chamber and beyond. It's a very important message. And as such, would he join me in wishing the very best of luck to the 83 cyclists who have set off from West Yorkshire this morning on the 9th Jo Cox Way bike ride, travelling 280 miles down the country to London, celebrating all that we have in common through the power of cycling, including, sadly for the cyclists, probably quite a lot of sore legs and aching muscles.
Of course I will wish them good luck. I admire them. I'm not sure I envy them. It's 280 miles. But it's a brilliant cause, and the whole House, I think, misses our dear friend Jo. And I know that she would have been incredibly proud to have seen this government in place and would have played a big part in it. And, you know, I'd like to welcome my honourable friend back to her place. And I know that she will continue in Jo's spirit with the same dedication and determination. And I think I'm right in saying that her parents, and of course Jo's parents, are with us in the gallery today to see this first PMQs. We will always have more in common than that which divides us.
It comes to the Leader of the Lib Dems, Sir Ed Davey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I welcome the Prime Minister to his place at his first Prime Minister's questions? And can I associate myself and my party with the comments he made about the appalling attack on the soldier in Kent? And our thoughts are with his family and friends and comrades. And can I also associate our side with his comments on Team GB and particularly talk about how we want them to succeed in Paris? The Prime Minister has many messes that he's inherited. One of them is the scandal over the carers' allowance repayments. An example is my constituent, Andrea, who is a full-time carer for her elderly mum. She went back to work part-time, mainly for her mental health, she tells me. She was earning less than £7,000 a year and has been hit by a bill from the DWP for £4,600. But Andrea is just one of tens of thousands of carers facing these repayments, punished for working and earning just a few more pounds than the earnings limit. So will the Prime Minister agree to meet with me and other family carers to try to resolve this matter?
Yeah. Can I thank the honourable member for raising this? And he, of course, has been a tireless advocate for carers. And I don't think any of us could be other than moved when we saw the video of him and his son that was put out during the election campaign. He talks about Team GB. I'm glad he's in a suit today because we're more used to seeing him in a wetsuit. But in relation to this issue, look, we have a more severe crisis than we thought as we go through the books of the last 14 years. We must review the challenges. I know they don't like it. They don't like it. There was a reason the electorate rejected them so profoundly. So we'll review the challenges that we face. We do want to work with the sector and where we can across the House to create a national care service covering all these aspects. And we'll start with carers and those that work in the care sector with a fair pay agreement. But I'm very happy to work across the House with all the people that care so passionately about this particular issue.
Fred David.
The Prime Minister's response. I hope he will look at this matter, though, on carers' allowance. Family carers save the taxpayer £162 billion a year. And if we get this right, many could go back into work. But there's another care crisis that's probably even bigger, and that's the crisis in social care. I'm sure, like me, he's met millions of people around the country, heard about millions of people for whom this is their biggest issue and has been for decades. After a once-in-a-century election, does he not think there's an opportunity for a once-in-a-century chance to fix social care and thus help our NHS? So can I ask him to set up a cross-party commission on social care so we can address this urgent matter?
He's right, it is a crisis. I'm sorry to have to report to the House it's not the only crisis that we've inherited. There's a crisis of failure absolutely everywhere after 14 years of failure that this government of service will begin the hard yards of fixing, including on social care. We will work across the House. We do endeavour to create a national care service. That will not be easy, but we can begin the first steps, and we will share that across the House where we can.
And a little bit.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. For decades, my constituent, Jack Taylor, has been continuously ignored by previous governments. He and other nuclear veterans have been denied access to their medical records and compensation. The Prime Minister has rightly said these national heroes deserve full accountability and justice. Will he therefore consider supporting a special tribunal with statutory powers into this 70-year-long scandal?
Can I first express my gratitude to the service personnel who participated in the British nuclear testing programme. It is right that I think nearly 5,000 now have got the nuclear test medals in recognition of their service, and the veterans have the right to apply for no-fault compensation under the War Pensions Scheme. And I will ensure on this issue a meeting is arranged for her with the relevant minister.
Stephen Flynn.
Mr Speaker, may I again warmly congratulate the Prime Minister on ending Tory rule. In his campaign to do so, he was, of course... They're too close for comfort now. They're too close for comfort. In his campaign to do so, Mr Speaker, he was, of course, joined by Gordon Brown. And just 5 days before the general election in Scotland, on the front page of the Daily Record, Gordon Brown instructed voters to vote Labour to end child poverty. Yet last night, Labour MPs from Scotland were instructed to retain the two-child cap, which forces children into poverty. So, Prime Minister, what changed?
I'm glad he mentioned Gordon Brown, because the last Labour government lifted millions of children out of poverty, something we're very, very proud of. And this government will approach the question with the same vigour. With our new task force, already we've taken steps: breakfast clubs, abolishing no-fault evictions, decent home standard.
Order. Props are not allowed to be used. Never mind, put it down. We don't need any more. Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, already we've set up a task force to put that vigour in place. 3 breakfast clubs in every primary school, abolishing no-fault eviction, decent home standard, Awab's law, and a plan to make work pay. But I would just say this: before he lectures everyone else, he should explain why, since the SNP came to power, there are 30,000 more children in poverty in Scotland.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I'm pleased to see the government's swift action in officially calling for an immediate ceasefire, the release of all hostages, a rapid increase of humanitarian aid into Gaza, the restoration of funds to UNRWA, the commitment to complying with potential ICC arrest warrants, and to recognizing a Palestinian state. But too many innocent people are still dying every day. There is nowhere safe in Gaza. So what further pressure can the Prime Minister apply to bring about an urgent ceasefire?
Both the Foreign Secretary and I have set out the urgent need for a ceasefire to Prime Minister Netanyahu. We want a pathway to a two-state solution, a safe and secure Israel alongside a viable sovereign Palestinian state. And I used my first overseas trip as Prime Minister, particularly at NATO, to raise this with world leaders. And under a Labour government, this subject will be discussed, negotiated and fought for at the highest levels on the world stage. The alternative is standing on street corners protesting. Ultimately, only one of those will deliver change.
Jordan.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and can I congratulate the Prime Minister and welcome to his place. And I'm sure he will want to reassure the many parents and teachers in Edinburgh West who've expressed concerns about the implication for our state education system in Scotland of the VAT increase in independent fees, which he proposes. Edinburgh City Council, led by the Labour Party, have produced 5-year projections which show we do not have capacity in the city to accommodate pupils who may leave the independent sector. Moreover, how will he ensure that the VAT raised in Scotland from those fees can be reinvested in already hard-pressed Scottish education?
I do obviously understand the aspiration that parents who work hard and save hard have for their children that they send to private schools. But every parent has that aspiration, whichever school they go to. And I am determined that we will have the right teachers in place in our state secondary schools to ensure that every child, wherever they come from, whatever their background, has the same opportunity. And I do not apologise for that.
Mr. Speaker, I welcome last week's announcement this government will be introducing a new publicly owned company, Great British Energy. This will be critical to ensure this country's energy security while meeting our climate goals and lowering energy bills. Will the Prime Minister make assurances to communities up and down the country that they will benefit from good skilled jobs and opportunities that Great British Energy promises to unlock?
Yes, and I'm really pleased that Great British Energy will be owned by and for the British people. Investing in the energy systems of the future, that means cheaper bills, renewables are cheaper. It means security, so Putin can't put his boot on our throat, and it means the next generation of jobs for years to come. Thank you.
And thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister has achieved something that we didn't think would be possible in such a short period of time. In less than 3 weeks, he has had a significant rebellion and he has suspended 7 of his members of Parliament, all for standing up for child poverty. This from a Labour government. The headlines are awful for the Prime Minister this morning. Poverty campaigners are furious with the Prime Minister. Is his honeymoon over before it's even begun?
Having left for the election campaign with quite a significant number of SNP members and come back with a small handful, I really don't think lectures on what the electorate in Scotland are thinking. If you look at I'm very proud of our Scottish Labour MPs on this side of the House. And I simply repeat the point I made to his leader. Perhaps the SNP needs to account for the 30,000 extra children in poverty in Scotland. Thank you.
Dan Tomlinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The previous Conservative government cut the funding for the police in London by 1/3, taking £1 billion out of the budgets for London's policing and forcing the closure of both of the police stations in the Chipping Barnet constituency. Does the Prime Minister agree with me on the importance of our police stations and in the need to rebuild local policing?
Can I welcome my honourable friend to his place, the first ever Labour MP for Chipping Barnet, and I know he will serve his constituency with pride. And our guarantee will put 13,000 extra neighbourhood officers and PCSOs back on Britain's streets, and that's a fully funded plan. He's right to say that the last government absolutely hammered police numbers, and he will have seen the impact of that in his constituency. And it is telling that the former Justice Secretary said at the weekend that that could perhaps have been done differently. And I'm glad to see the people of Chipping Barnet agree with that assessment and returned him for that constituency.
Rupert Lowe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituents in Great Yarmouth have little doubt that uncontrolled legal and illegal immigration since 1997 has damaged and disrupted their community and undermined their public services. Does the Prime Minister agree that importing millions of people with no thought whatsoever to the brutal consequences has failed our country? I know the good people of Great Yarmouth would much appreciate a yes or no answer to this straightforward question.
I'm not sure I agree with his numbers, but look, I do think that it's serious that the previous government lost control of our borders. Record numbers have crossed the Channel since the Leader of the Opposition, when he was Prime Minister for 18 months, 50,000 people crossed the Channel. It's a serious issue that requires a serious answer. And that is why we will set up our Border Security Command to take down the gangs that are running this vile trade. What we won't do is waste further time on a gimmick that cost a fortune and remove just 4 volunteers.
Bill Esterson.
The Liverpool City region has one of the biggest concentrations of offshore wind in the world. 100,000 homes could be powered through the Mersey Tidal project. Yet some members opposite want to block the jobs, the lower bills and the energy security from renewable energy. So can I encourage my right honourable friend to resist the siren voices opposite and support a range of technologies, including the Mersey tidal project to maximise the benefits of clean energy for our country.
Clean energy is at the heart of this mission-driven government. Boosting homegrown renewable energy is the best way to create new jobs, give us energy independence and lower bills for good. And that's why we'll be changing the planning rules to make sure that we can get Britain building again. And not just the houses, but everything that we need, including prisons, by the way, and to make sure we can deal with the mess that we have inherited. I'm pleased to hear of the viable projects that are being advanced, such as the Mersey Tidal project, and we'll look at them carefully.
Lewis Clocking.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a privilege to be the first Conservative member to ask the new Prime Minister a question at PMQs. Can the Prime Minister assure me and my constituents in Broxbourne that they will not just have a say, but a meaningful say over new development in the Greenbelt in their area?
Can I welcome the honourable member to his place and be clear, we intend to get Britain building. We will change the planning regime in order to do so. It's held us back for far too long. Young people have not been able to own a home until they're way past the age of 35, denying them the basic dream of home ownership. Of course, we will work with communities, but we will take the tough decisions that the last government ran away from.
Prime Minister, we've got much to be proud of in Ipswich, from a thriving arts and culture scene to beautiful parks and a stunning waterfront. Unlike our friends over the border in Norfolk, we also now have a Premier League football team again. Prime Minister is very welcome to join when Arsenal come visit next year. Despite all those positives, though, after the last 14 years, our town centre is really struggling and desperately needs help. Can the Prime Minister set out to this House the steps he will take to revive town centres like Ipswich?
Can I again welcome my honourable friend to his place? Congratulate Ipswich on their promotion, though not on, I think it's Boxing Day when they visit Arsenal. I'm going to resist the temptation that he puts in front of me to choose between Ipswich and Norwich. But on town centres, he's right that we need vibrant high streets. We need to make the change that we've voted in to bring about, and that's why we will replace the business rate system to level the playing field, and we will absolutely address regional inequality through our local growth plans.
Jim Ramsey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The UK is one of the most nature-depleted countries on Earth, so I welcome the government's signal that it's committed to nature recovery. This is critical to humanity's future, as it affects everything from food security to public health and well-being. Please, could the Prime Minister tell us how he'll show leadership personally on this existential issue? And in particular, will he attend the 16th Biodiversity COP later this year? And will the UK government be launching a bid to host a future UN Nature Summit?
We are committed to nature recovery. It's a really important issue that this government will tackle. And he talks about leadership, and I'd ask him to show some, because it's extraordinary that, elected to this House as a Green politician, he's opposing vital clean energy infrastructure in his own constituency. So I ask him, we will put the plans before this House, I ask him to back those plans.
Joe Powell.
Mr. Speaker, on Sunday night at a community event in North Kensington, attended by hundreds of people, 15-year-old Renee Graham was shot and killed in a senseless act of violence, and my heart goes out to his family and the wider community that is feeling anxious, frightened and shocked. Can the Prime Minister ensure that North Kensington gets support from this government at this difficult time? And can he outline what measures the government will take to tackle gun violence and prevent young lives like Renee's being taken in the future?
I welcome my honourable friend to his place and thank him for raising this awful case. The loss of a teenage boy in West London is shocking, and our thoughts, and I'm sure I speak for the whole House, are with his family and friends. I do urge the public to support the Metropolitan Police with any information which could help in their investigation, which is ongoing. Making streets safer is one of the 5 central missions of this government, and this is a shocking reminder of just how important that mission is. And we have an ambition to drive down this sort of violence in our communities. We do not want interventions like this, as we've had over the last few years, and it is shocking to hear of this particular incident.
Vickers.
The last government invested massively in Teesside, most recently committing £1 billion to improving transport in our area. That money will protect the future of our iconic transporter bridge, upgrade Thornaby train station, create a new transport hub at Teesside Park and much, much more. Can the Prime Minister confirm, are we still getting our £1 billion, or is Labour turning its back on Teesside?
Well, he talks about turning its back. I think he's the sole remaining Tory MP in the North East or Teesside. I've already taken an early opportunity to make our commitment clear to the plans that we need for economic growth across the country, working with all the mayors who are in place, including those who wear a different rosette, and that's the way in which we will take this forward.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In a week where the National Police Chiefs Council have declared violence against women and girls a national emergency, Sky News has today published appalling accounts of sexual harassment and violence against women paramedics. Can the Prime Minister please update the House on progress towards the mission board to finally tackle this scourge in our society?
Well, can I thank my honourable friend for raising this, because it is such a serious issue. And we have made a commitment, a mission to halve violence against women and girls. Mr. Speaker, I know from my own experience dealing with these cases as a prosecutor and subsequently just how hard that will be to achieve. It does mean that we'll have to deliver in a different way. We'll have to roll up our sleeves and do difficult things that haven't been done in the past. And in answer to the specific question, we've started work already on the delivery board, and I look forward to updating her and the House on the progress that we're making on this really important issue.
Final questions to Roger Gale.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Speaker. Another Freudian slip. The old dog is off the leash. Mr. Speaker, could I first thank both the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition for their supportive policies in relation to Ukraine. Their expressions today will have been of great comfort to the thousands of Ukrainian residents in the United Kingdom who simply wish to return to their lawful homes. Further to the answer given to my honourable friend, the member for Broxbourne, can the Prime Minister tell the House how he's planning reforms which will smother fields in East Kent currently yielding bread-making wheat with houses is compatible with his own Secretary of State for Agriculture's desire to achieve sustainability?
Thank you for that question. We have to get economic growth in this country. We've had failure over the last 14 years, and the failure on economic growth has been central to it. There's been failure to build the infrastructure we need, the houses we need, the prisons we need, and I think the whole House can see the consequence of that. We've got prison overcrowding where emergency measures have had to be taken because the building of prisons hasn't kept pace with the sentencing of those to prisons. We've got housing crisis where the dream of home ownership for most young people is simply gone under the previous government. To be over the age of 35 before you can get a secure roof over your head of your own is a huge dash of dreams. We're not going to listen to the party opposite. They put their case to the electorate. The electorate rejected them profoundly. And my advice would be, having sat at that dispatch box for 4.5 long years, is when you get rejected that profoundly by the electorate, it's best not to go back to the electorate and tell them that they were wrong. It's best to reflect and change your approach and change your party.
That completes questions. We'll let the front
Well,
benches.
that brings us to the end of the first Prime Minister's questions for Keir Starmer, and with Rishi Sunak as now the leader of the opposition. It does feel and look very different. We had questions from Reform UK, from the Liberal Democrat leader Ed Davey, now the third largest party in the Commons. We still heard from Stephen Flynn, who used to be in Ed Davey's position as the SNP's leader at Westminster. But it was very much a calm, quite serious, even sombre Prime Minister's questions first outing for Keir Starmer in his premiership. What did you make of it, Vicki?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that's going to last long, is it? But I think for the first one, clearly Rishi Sunak decided to go on something that has been very close to his heart, which is about the future of Ukraine. And as you say, a very different atmosphere. I mean, people will be tuning in thinking what on earth has happened to British politics. But I think, you know, it won't last long. This is, as you say, it's almost a one-off, isn't it? Because we'll be going into the parliamentary recess, and then by the time we come back in September, I would imagine things might have moved on and there might be a bit more toing and froing when it comes to issues like tax, for example. But, you know, there were some elements of people not agreeing with the Prime Minister, but they were probing questions from his own side to some extent. There was one about puberty blockers from one of his own MPs, and one about the Middle East and whether he would push for an immediate ceasefire. And his response to that was pretty interesting, where he talked about how those kind of issues would be decided on the world stage, and sort of making the point that he is now going to be on that world stage rather than, as he put it, protesting on street corners. So, yes, a very different atmosphere. Of course, the two men, they've swapped sides. They have had a little bit of a warm-up because the King's Speech debate. So I think Rishi Sunak getting used to being on the other side, if you like. Self-deprecating humour, he's used that quite a lot, about wishing the Olympic team well, but saying they probably wouldn't take any lessons from him when it came to knowing how to win. But I wouldn't expect this to last too long. I'm sure we will go back to the bear pit.
The heat will return, will it, in
so.
September. Let's introduce our guests for this part of Politics Live. Steve Reed, Secretary of State for the Environment, Andrew Griffith, Shadow Science Secretary, and, of course, Vicki Young, the BBC's Deputy Political Editor. Yes, there was a lot of consensus between Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer, certainly on foreign affairs and in terms of the approach and continuing support on issues like Ukraine. What did you make of some of the interventions by Labour MPs on the issues that Vicki was just mentioning, that actually the dissent is going to come, and it already is, from behind Keir Starmer?
Well, I don't think that dissent will come.
Well, it is already.
Challenge is appropriate. You know, we've got over 400 Labour MPs now, which is more than double the number we had before the general election. I spent a lot of the campaign up and down the country, so I had a chance to meet more of them there than I've had so far in the few days we've been back in Parliament. They're very committed to their communities. They're going to be very strong advocates for them. You would expect an MP always to question and push the government to do more. But I think what we've also seen, that rebellion you alluded to last night was very, very small. The vast majority of Labour MPs there got behind the government, got behind the first King's Speech that we've heard in the Chamber for 15 years. And I think that will be the theme of our party in government during this period.
Well, the theme that you will have Labour MPs voting for opposition parties' amendments on the issue of the two-child benefit cap. You say it was very small. Well, let's have a look at a tweet here from one of them, Zara Sultana. She's been suspended along with 6 others. I've been informed by the Chief Whip and the Labour Party leadership that the whip has been withdrawn from me for voting to scrap the two-child benefit cap, which would lift 330,000 children out of poverty. I will always stand up for the most vulnerable in our society. Are you comfortable that they've been suspended?
It's 7 of them out of 412, just to put that
But hang on, there were other abstentions. There were some of them, of course, very legitimate, others uncomfortable with coming to vote with the government on its agenda.
It was still 7 out of 412.
Within a week of government.
And I think it's appropriate. You would expect, just having come through a general election where we've won a landslide in the House of Commons on a very clear mandate, you would expect our MPs to come and vote for that in the King's Speech, the first King's Speech for 15 years. So I think the sanction that has been taken against those very, very tiny number who did not support Labour's King's Speech is appropriate. But the thing I would focus on is not the 2% that went the other way, it's the 98% that didn't.
I'm sure you would. But we'll just for a moment stick with the 7 MPs, because it was pretty surprising. It's the sort of, you could say, ruthlessness that perhaps Rishi Sunak lacked when he was Prime Minister. And looking at the questions that he posed to the now Prime Minister, were you a bit disappointed by the lack of heat and scrutiny on Keir Starmer?
No, look, I think that scrutiny is going to come each and every time. So I think this was the first time out. And you did see some differences. You saw the Labour Prime Minister try, I thought in quite a half-hearted way, once again, this sort of bait-and-switch line that we've, got into power, despite the brutal transparency of the books in the UK system, the OBR reporting on them, the fact that Labour members of Parliament and ministers now have been serving on select committees to scrutinise every single thing that's happened, this mock effort to sort of throw up your hands, say everything's much worse than we thought, despite the fact that was all in plain sight, clearly trying to roll the pitch for tax rises in many ways to keep Steve's backbenchers in check, because it's going to be a high-spending, high-taxing Labour government. But that was the complete opposite of what I was here 3 or 4 weeks ago, sitting here talking to Darren Jones, the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, saying that they weren't going to be putting up taxes.
Well, the narrative did come through about halfway. Steve, what did you say to it? Which is, this isn't the only crisis, he was referring to social care, we've inherited from the previous Conservative government.
Well, I mean, we knew it was bad because we saw what Liz Truss did when she crashed the economy with all of their support and the damage that did to people. But, we had the new Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, standing up and pointing out that it was £700 million they wasted on the Rwanda gimmick to send 4 volunteers to Rwanda. £700 million. They could have used that money to get more officials dealing with the asylum seeker arrivals and then process them quicker to take those who have no right to be here out of the country. In my own department, we're already uncovering overspends in budgets that we were told were underspent. So we're putting this all together. We want to be open and public, open and transparent. We didn't. I didn't. Until I got into DEFRA, I did not know which budgets were overspending because we were told they were not overspent. Now we're going to be.
If this was such a surprise, are you now saying that means you're going to have to do surprising things to put it right?
Well,
is that what you're doing? Are you preparing people to say we weren't going to do certain things and your manifesto maybe didn't mention them, but now you're saying you've been taken by such surprise that you might have to take action that you hadn't previously told the electorate? We're going to be
open and transparent in a way that the previous government was not. So I think it's very important that we show the public the things that we are finding in the departments that we've only been in still for a few days. And I'm sure Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, will have something to say about that. We'll then move into a spending review over the summer and into the autumn when we get to the budget. There is a huge problem to fix here, but this government is going to fix it.
This is a shocking slur on the professional civil service, on all of the mechanisms.
Or your legacy.
All of the mechanisms for transparency and accountability. And it's a clear bait and switch.
Did you know about the 700 million?
It's the dodgiest form of a finance director coming into a company, throwing up their hands, trying to kitchen sink everything. And in my view, this is a very clear piece of premeditation from Labour.
Well, you were in the government, so did you know that 700 million had been spent on Rwanda, not the much lower figure the government was telling us until the general election? Did you know? Did you try to cover it up?
Well, did you?
I wasn't in the Home Office, so...
Oh, you didn't know? There you go. You didn't know when you were in the government, so quite right, we should explain to people.
I was in the Department of Science, Innovation and Technology, and my professional civil servants would not be allowing me to overspend against budgets. That's not... We're going to vote in Parliament on the estimates later today. That will be the overall envelope. Of course, there are hard decisions. Every government comes in, and every day one has to make hard decisions. That's one reason why we have reserves. But this is a very clear, synthetic exercise. It's been briefed out from the top in the Cabinet Office.
Well, let's have a look at
a specific example. Manufacture for what Labour wanted to do anyway,
Andrew.
which was high spend.
Yeah, all right. Well,
taxing.
let's put some of the suggestions. The Daily Telegraph has this headline: Treasury urges Chancellor to target pension savings of 6 million middle-class workers and impose a flat 30% rate of tax relief. Is that what you're going to do?
Labour was absolutely clear all the way through the election, and we will stick to those commitments. There will not be any increase in VAT, national insurance or income tax.
Right, but hang on. This is not right. Well, that doesn't come into those. So will you rule that out?
The only additional spend, the additional spends that we have announced, we have fully costed and showed how they will be fully funded. The 40,000 additional appointments every week in the NHS, the 6,000 additional teachers that will be going into our schools, very specific about closing the non-dom tax loopholes and closing the VAT loophole on private schools.
That only raises a certain amount of cash. All right, well, just on that then, you can commit to not introducing a flat 30% tax relief rate
There's
on
no
pension.
need to do those things because the things that we said we would inject additional cash on, we've already explained where the additional funding
You
will
said you found all these other things, though, that you've got to now.
Well, you know,
right. So is that going to be efficiency savings?
I'm sitting in the
public
Department for the
services?
of the Environment. I'm finding overspends that we weren't told about before. We're looking at how we can do things more efficiently so we can deliver better for less without recourse.
So it's not higher spending.
That's the way we're doing it.
Let's go.
We can make the government more efficient. They were so chaotic. I think the average tenure of an environment secretary the last 14 years was only just over 12 months. You know, when that constant churn, no wonder no one had a grip. You know, we're going to look at what we can do to drive efficiency through the system, do better for less, but we will not be raising the taxes we said.
They made those commitments.
You heard it again, right? I mean, once again, they say we're not going to raise taxes. Let's hold them to this. Let's make sure this is the case. Now, the truth is that departments have accounting officers, the permanent secretaries. At any point in time through a financial year, there are underspends and overspends. So I look forward to you reporting on those.
About that before the election.
Let me bring up
on those overspends. Why are you dishonest?
Right. Well, we'll come back to the issue of scrutiny. You say Rishi Sunak is going to continue to do that.
Bait and switch government.
You're saying you knew now what you said you didn't know. You know.
Right. Well, let's talk about something that has come up. Rachel Reeves is in discussions about, and that's public sector pay. And the pay review recommendation could be 5.5%. It's reported to be 5.5%. Rachel Reeves, to meet that, would have to find £10 billion across the board. Now, that isn't in your costed manifesto because, as you say, you didn't know what the pay review body, of course, was going to recommend, and most governments follow it. Where will you find £10 billion?
Well, that specific issue will be for Rachel and the trade unions to talk about.
Will she have to raise taxes, increase borrowing or cut spending?
I've seen exactly how difficult life has become for working people, both in the public sector and in the private sector, because of the cost of living crisis inflicted on the country by the previous government when they crashed the economy. The whole country deserves a pay rise. The way we can do that is by growing the economy. So a lot of the things we've been talking about, building 1.5 million new homes, setting up GB Energy, switching to a clean energy economy, is to grow the economy so we can get more money coming in and give people a pay rise. If the economy had grown as fast under the 14 Conservative years as under the previous 13 Labour years, the economy would be £140 billion bigger overall, and last year the Exchequer would have had an additional £58 billion to spend on things like pay rises.
Right,
So
well, we will come back
is
to
the
this issue
central
because
mission of
growth isn't going to happen before you have to make some of these critical decisions.
No one
but
said
Andrew
it was going to be
Griffith,
quick, Jo. No one said it was going to be easy.
No, and in the meantime, you might have to make a decision about increasing borrowing, raising taxes or cutting spending of unprotected
to very clear
departments.
spending rules because we will not do what the Tories did and crash the economy.
Right, well,
We
on
will not
that,
do
is Rishi Sunak the right person to still be at the dispatch box across from Keir Starmer up until November the 2nd?
Yeah, for sure. The leader of the opposition has an important role in holding the government to account. We all, as shadow ministers, shadow cabinet, will be doing that in each of our departments. And it's important that we take the time to find the right
So you're happy with the
timetable?
timetable. Well, who would you like to see as his successor?
Oh, look, I mean, we haven't even had nominations open yet, let alone
James Cleverly, the former Home Secretary, former Foreign Secretary, has said, I'm in.
We're lucky to have a range of talent, and I respect so many of our colleagues, and they've all got a lot to bring. And then once we've got a leader, it's important that we all work together.
What about you? You're going to throw your hat into the ring?
I'm not going to throw my hat into the ring. I'm a loyal, hard-working colleague. My
I'm sure they're all loyal, hard-working.
Is about getting results through working well as a team, and that's a lesson just as much as finding the right leader to take us forward. Is how we all work as an effective team to take apart this government.
Right, but take it apart.
It's got a thin mandate. Now, they got that mandate on the back of promising not to put up taxes, with a couple of clear exceptions.
All right.
And it's really important for the British people, only 34% of whom voted for this government, notwithstanding that we lost, for sure, that we hold them to account.
Right, but in terms of holding them to account, you're going to have many months then of Rishi Sunak, perhaps very politely, continuing to probe Keir Starmer. Who would you like to see? What is going to be the job of the next Conservative leader? Which direction should the party go in?
Well, I think it's less about the overall direction. Labour came to power in many cases promising to continue things that we've done. They promised not to put up taxes on working people, for example. We're a party that's trying to reduce taxes.
You put taxes up to a record level.
You did. You did. Let's just begin. You did put up taxes to a record level.
Joe, we've had this debate very many times. Of course we did. In the context of the uniquely difficult circumstances that your viewers understand probably better than Steve about Ukraine and a global pandemic. But if you looked at the last direction of travel, the last budgets that we presented to the country, we were reducing taxes on working people. So that's an important point. Now, once again,
is it more important
to
blunt reform or the Liberal Democrats?
Well, what is important to me is that we re-earn our reputation for competency and trust. And I think that's what I heard ultimately on the doorstep was, yes, you've got to get a Conservative Party set of policies that are coherent and understood. Of course, opposition, as Steve well knows, is extremely hard. And so it's important that we rebuild that, first by demonstrating our ability as a competent opposition, secondly by uniting behind whoever is the leader, and third by going back to a set of coherent policies so that the Conservative brand stands for something that people understand.
Right. Is it going to be a crowded field, do you think?
They need 10 people to back them, don't they? We've had all sorts of people saying, people being spotted, potential candidates spotted over in the House of Commons, trying to talk to colleagues to get them to back them. So I think there'll be an awful lot at the beginning, and then the timetable is that will get whittled down by MPs to 4 when they come back, I think, in September.
All right.
And then they have this beauty parade, as it might be called by some, at the Tory Party conference.
Let's have a look at this tweet. It's from the Home Office. They posted this a little earlier today. We are taking control of irregular migration. And you can read the rest underneath. But if you focus on the word irregular migration rather than illegal, if we have a look at this tweet from the Conservative MP and ex-immigration minister, he said this, Robert Jenrick, and possibly a contender for the Conservative leadership, you misspelt illegal. What's changed in government policy?
That's semantics, isn't it? I mean, the issue here is the number of people that are getting into this country illegally and then being allowed to stay. You know, as Keir Starmer was just saying, 50,000 under Rishi Sunak's premiership came into this country. But, you know, like in the Hotel California song, you can enter, but you can never leave while the Tories were in power. They were spending £8 million a day keeping people in hotels, but failing to process their asylum claims.
If you arrive and want to claim asylum and you arrive in those small boats, is it illegal that you have travelled on that small boat and paid money to get here and claim asylum or not?
Well, the key point is, if you process the asylum claims, you can return...
That's not the answer to my question. Are you still illegal because the government, rightly or wrongly, the last Conservative government, changed the law in order to deem those people illegal? Are they no longer illegal?
Well, the law is still the law. The point is, you've got people coming into this country who, were they having their claims processed, should be removed from this country, but they were not under the Conservatives. They were here forever in a perma backlog, stuck in hotels at the taxpayers' expense, and that was £8 million a day. We were heading to an annual bill of £40 billion to pay for that. Now, what this government has done is cancel the Rwanda gimmick, £700 million wasted on sending just 4 volunteers to Rwanda. That money is now being used to fund the additional officials to process the claims. We can then remove those with no entitlement.
But why have they changed the word? Is this a fuss over nothing, isn't it?
Well, it's a fuss because there is nothing. It's just moving around letters, whether it's setting up effectively continuation of a border security force, now moving around the letters from illegal to irregular. The reality is all the government has done in the face of this very pressing crisis, and having come on in, once again, as a bait and switch, come on in and talk tough, all it's actually done is try and soften this, remove the Bibi Stockholm, stop the ability to process overseas, which was one potential tool in the armory.
No flight ever took off to Rwanda, Andrew Griffith, and you know that. No flight ever took off. That policy has never been tested. You promised, as a government, when you were in power, to stop the boats.
We had a plan to do that, and it's the same plan that other European nations are looking at. The election intervened. We've rehearsed that.
Well, he called the election Rishi Sunak as Prime Minister.
But the point is now, and there'll be a point when you decide to pivot from talking about our record to talking about the record of this government, that we've got 2 weeks in. They've cancelled the Bibi Stockholm. Right. They've cancelled the ability for offshore processing and said they won't do that. And now, in an Orwellian fashion, they're trying to redenominate illegal into regular.
How quickly will we see a reduction in those small boat crossings?
Well, I don't know the answer to that question. What we'll see is the Rwanda gimmick cancelled, 700 million saved.
That's happened.
The money being spent on officials who will now process asylum claims, and those people with no right to be here will be removed. Under the Tories, they were here forever.
Where will they be removed to, Steve?
At the public's expense. A safe first country.
Right.
It's entirely possible to do that. We had such a scheme with Albania. We should be doing more schemes like that.
Those are the schemes where you can agree that with a third country. What about where you can't agree that?
Four elections in a row, they claimed they would reduce illegal migration. 4 elections in a row, it went up.
Listen, we may not have heat today in the House of Commons, but we've had it here on the set, in the studio. But thank you to all of my guests for joining me today. Bye.